What if the resurrection doesn't actually make everything clear, but it actually just disrupts how we've always understood God and presence and reality? I'm Pastor Nate. This is another episode of the Sunday School Remix. Today we're talking about Easter and the resurrection of Jesus, particularly as found in John chapter 20. Here we go.
Welcome to the Sunday School Remix, the show where we take Bible stories you learned as a kid and look at them with fresh eyes. Each week, we dig into the context and the overlooked details, and we often discover interpretations we never heard growing up. This isn't about winning arguments, but simply hearing God's living word speak to our lives again today. So grab your Bible and put aside your assumptions, and let's dive into another episode of the Sunday School Remix.
The way that John tells the resurrection story, he doesn't lay it out there as something clear and final. There's so much confusion and misunderstanding and wonder within the story itself. John's gospel is really big on the idea of belief, more so than any of the other gospels, and that shows up again and again, and there's lots of sub-themes related to it. John's gospel is where we hear a lot about light and darkness, right? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. I am the light of the world. A lot of these words show up in John's gospel, and it's this idea that belief is where we need to be. And what I love about that is that John seems to be really encouraging us to just believe. But we use that nowadays and make it something very concrete. It's like, hey, do you believe or don't you believe? And then we use it as a litmus test to be like, oh, well, they believe and they don't believe, and so they're in and they're out. And that's not at all what John is trying to get at. What John is talking about is belief as a form of trust. And that's a really wonderful way to think about our faith. Is that, yes, faith will include doubt. It will include questions in moments when we aren't exactly sure. But do you trust? Do you trust the promises of God that have been revealed to you? Do you trust that this is a better way to live? That this is a deeper promise to put your stake on? And so, what's beautiful about the way that John tells the resurrection story is it's playing with these ideas of belief. And it's showing a really messy situation. And there's three disciples who show up. We've got Mary, we've got the beloved disciple, and we've got Peter. And they all, in their own way, kind of deal with this idea of trust. Like, what conclusions are you going to make based on what you see? And that's a really good segue into the way that John uses the word see, because he actually, in the course of John chapter 20, uses three different forms of see, three different Greek words. We don't pick up on this in our typical Bible because English translation just is like see, but John talks about Mary seeing the stone removed. And this is the ordinary way of seeing. It's an easy translation there. But then later on, John tells us about the beloved disciple who saw and believed. And this is a very different type of seeing, and it's a different Greek word than the one that Mary uses when she sees the stone. You see, the beloved disciple here is having a deeper sense of perception. It's not just noticing something, it's seeing on a spiritual level. Then even later in this chapter 20, Mary sees Jesus, but does not know him. And this is kind of bringing in that third form of seeing, which is kind of misreading a situation. So anyways, as we can see, John is telling this resurrection story in a messy way, and is encouraging us to recognize, this is hard to wrap your mind around. This is something that people will wrestle with in different ways and make different conclusions about. And you might not exactly always have a clear understanding of what this means for you. And that's okay. It's a very generous way of telling the story. But it's John's way of trying to encourage greater belief and greater trust by not beating us over the head with it. And so, looking at the story, it tells us on the first day of the week that Mary goes to the tomb. And what's incredible about that little detail is what it suggests. The idea is that the world was created in 6 days and God rested on the seventh. 7 days of creation. So the first day of the week would then be the 8th day. Yes. And that is John trying to tell us that something new is beginning, that something new is happening. The 8th day of the week, the day of the resurrection, is when the world begins again. And we'll see later on in the way John tells this story that that's almost definitely what he was trying to get at. Creation is becoming new. Death is being undone. Something new is taking place. Did you know that most baptismal fonts are 8-sided octagons? Not always, but if you look, it's a pretty common architectural feature that they create baptismal fonts to have 8 sides. And the idea is that baptism is the place of new life. Baptism is an 8th day activity. It is where creation begins again with this child, adult, individual. On the 8th day, resurrection happens and is still happening. I think that's super cool. I love that. The baptismal font here is 8-sided, and I always like to point that out to people. Anyways, back to the story. So Mary gets to the tomb, and it's empty. And her original assumption is that it's grave robbers, which, of course, when she sees the stone rolled away, why wouldn't you think that it was some nefarious people? That's the most logical conclusion. Something bad has happened here. Only it's not the case. Mary goes and finds the empty tomb, and she comes back and tells the disciples. And so the beloved disciple and Peter rush to the tomb. And the beloved disciple gets there first, which I think is just a really fun little detail in the story, because as we'll read later on, the beloved disciple is the one who wrote the gospel. It's likely John. And it's just kind of funny that he wanted to put in yeah, and I was faster than Peter. But the two of them arrive at the tomb and have a different reaction to it. The beloved disciple sees and believes. As we said, it's that different type of seeing. So he sees the empty tomb and draws a conclusion about it. And Peter also seems to have some interesting ideas about it, and the two of them go out to tell the other disciples what they've encountered. But then you have Mary, who remains and weeps. For her, the empty tomb is not the reassurance that she was hoping for or needing. The empty tomb to her seems like a sign of panic or theft. And it bears these marks of intentionality. The way that John tells the story is that there's something here that is unsettling to her. And isn't that interesting in our own lives as well? Is that when God is at work trying to bring about new things in our life, lead us in new directions, how often do we misinterpret it and see it as a bad thing or as a sign of grief, rather than a beautiful, possible new beginning? We can get so set on our own ways of thinking about things that we don't believe. By that I mean we don't trust that God is still at work and can work through even a situation that seems like a dead end, that seems like a tragedy or an ending. Maybe that's just the beginning of something new being born. What's interesting too is to see how Mary then encounters angels and still isn't convinced. Again, another really neat detail from the gospel writer John to help us to think about too, God can send all sorts of messages to us, and even still we can be stuck in our grief, in our way of understanding how things should be or what's happening. Or just, to defend Mary, she's been through a lot in the last few days, and this just probably feels like one additional tragedy heaped onto an already incredibly traumatic weekend. But the details that we see here really speak to some incredible intentionality about what is happening. She notices the grave clothes, and they're neatly folded. They're not just strewn about. If this had been robbers, that wouldn't be the case. And it suggests that God is doing something very intentional in this moment. This isn't haphazard. This isn't just a flash in the pan idea. This was the plan all along. And God has gone to great lengths for it to all play out exactly as it has. The other crazy detail here is the two angels, one at the feet and one at the head. And what this is trying to hearken to is an understanding of the mercy seat. You see, the Ark of the Covenant is where cherubim flank the mercy seat. So that this has all of this old Hebraic implications for it. And the mercy seat, right, this whole space is where heaven and earth overlapped. It's the space where God was most present in the world. And so it carries with it that sense of the presence of God. And so we see here these angels flanking the space where Jesus has been buried. This is God coming close and coming near and coming into this world in a real, tangible way. The power of God made manifest in this moment, in this space. The empty space where Jesus was laying becomes something like the new Holy of Holies. And John actually has been seeding this idea throughout his entire gospel writing. In the beginning, in John chapter 1, it talks about how the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, but that word there is actually tabernacled. The Word became flesh and tabernacled among us, bringing in this like Holy of Holies, overlapping of heaven and earth idea, all of that right there. This is what's happening at the resurrection. God is coming near. The power of God is entering this existence, this plane of reality. And so Mary sees all this, still doesn't believe, and then walks outside and encounters the gardener, or this person who she assumes is the gardener. Like, hey, they took my Lord away, and I don't know why. I'm so upset. Having this conversation with the gardener, and then the gardener calls her by name, Mary, and she understands. She believes. When God calls us by name, we understand the power of God's presence. We see and trust in a different way. The gardener piece is that added detail that I was referencing earlier, because we know that humanity fell apart in a garden called Eden. But this is happening on the 8th day. This is the new creation. This is all of that human predicament and original sin, all of it getting reversed and something new coming about. The Apostle Paul will write about the old Adam and the new Adam, and speaking of Jesus as the new Adam, yeah, that's what's happening here, is that this original sinfulness, this human predicament that we all have to live with, it has been undone by Christ's death and resurrection. New possibility, new life is taking hold here on this Easter day. And so there's so much in this story that we can hold on to. It's the promise of new life. It's the promise of new possibilities. It's the promise of God showing up in our earthly plane in real, substantial, meaningful ways. But it also is this promise that the story's not over. That's so much of what's trying to be told to us. As I said in my podcast last week about the crucifixion, something happened. And this is why we can trust and believe. When Jesus was crucified, that was very clearly supposed to be the end. And everyone else who ever got crucified, it was the end. They were stricken from existence. But somehow that crucifixion moment wasn't the end. And we're still talking today about this carpenter's son from Nazareth. And it's because I believe something happened. That yes, the stone really was rolled away, and there really was a resurrected Jesus, because it was God undoing all of the brokenness that plagued human existence. And it's God telling us that even as these problems persist within us, there still is new possibility. There still is forgiveness, new life, new endeavors, that it doesn't have to end when we think it ends. And that's so much what Mary shows us throughout the story. So we have trouble believing. We have trouble trusting what we've been told about God and how God works and what it means for our life. That's hard for us. And even when we see angels or get reassurances, it can be so difficult. But God will call us by name, and God will lead us back. New life is possible. We don't have to be stuck in the garden forever, making the same mistakes. Something new can still take hold. There's a lot of thoughts for you on the Easter story. And we could probably keep going, because obviously this is one that's captured the imaginations of the world forever. But we'll leave it there today. I hope that gave you something to think about during this Easter season. And share this with family and friends, other people who might like to dive in a little deeper to what this resurrection moment is all about. I'm Pastor Nate. This has been the Sunday School Remix. Thanks for watching. And remember, the story didn't end in Sunday school.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Sunday School Remix. If you'd like more resources for your walk of faith, feel free to check out my church's website, bethany-denver.org, or you can download our mobile app by searching Bethany Connect in your phone's app store.